Hello, I'm Andy Schmuckler, a man on a mission, a man whose microphone's a little too high. Um, I'm going to talk about creativity for starters, but for starters, before starters, there are a couple of things that want to add to what I've said on previous videos, like last Monday, last time I was here doing this Man on a Mission live stream. Began conversation by a fairly long segment, actually, about the question: should Biden debate Trump? And I've encountered a new idea from somebody who wrote to Jennifer Rubin in the Washington Post in her weekly colloquy or whatever they call it. Had a different idea, which I think is worth talking about, or at least mentioning. I'm not going to talk about it. The two ideas that I proposed, and I sort of thought it through while I was talking on the live stream, and I ended up in favor of Biden saying, yes, I will debate Trump on these two conditions, or with these terms in place. One of them was that there be a fact-finding panel on the stage that either candidate could appeal to if the other candidate, or for their own, to verify or disconfirm something that had been said. It calls attention to the fact that Trump is one of the many ways that Trump is extraordinarily broken is his relationship with the truth, which is his statements have no affinity to the truth. Sometimes he'll say things that are true, but only when they serve his purposes, and he otherwise lies. So that the Washington Post counted over 30,000 lies that he told in the course of his 4-year term. And I'm old enough to remember that when Eisenhower, at the end of his second term, told the nation a single lie, which, by the way, was justified in terms of protecting national security, the country was sort of scandalized. What? The president told us a lie? But anyway, here we are with Trump having been president and trying to be president again. And the question of presidential debate, and I say, let's call attention to the fact that he's a liar, but more than that, let's make sure that the American people who are watching the debate don't get stuck with these lies without their being swatted down right away. So that was one proposal I made. The other proposal I made was that it be a general rule with the whatever network that the microphone of each candidate gets turned off when it's not their turn, and at the expiration of their 2 minutes or whatever they're given to speak at a given time, there be a set point of 5 seconds or whatever it takes to finish a sentence, at which point the microphone gets turned off. That both dramatizes that Trump can be relied upon to not respect whatever limits anybody imposes on him, and to make it such that he cannot seize power, which is what he does in coup d'etats, but also in terms of yielding the floor when it's not his turn. And it also would make the debate itself more the way it should be to serve the purposes, which are ultimately, and this is what I would have Biden put forward, that how he deals with the question of debates should be whatever it is that's best for serving to the health of American democracy, in which we've got the norm of people debate, which is a good one, and then we've also got other things that we have to deal with because of the particular nature of this extraordinary man, Donald Trump. I mean, I wonder if history will understand the extent to which this figure of Donald Trump has loomed over the country for, what is it, since the summer of 2015, I guess he announced. I mean, this has really been a historical epic. I mean, never has anybody ever had so much attention. We talk about him every day. He gets talked about more than the actual president of the United States. It's really quite extraordinary. And as with this debate thing, we're dealing with somebody who's extraordinarily impactful and always in destructive ways. So this is really a challenge of great magnitude. So the other thing I heard about another idea, and I don't know if I'm ready to endorse it, but it's got a certain charm. If Biden didn't want to debate Trump, because this would be a term that I simply can't imagine that Trump would accept. He might accept the other ones if he actually really does want to debate. And you know, as I said when I talked about this, he claimed he wanted to testify the Mueller investigation, but he never did testify, and he never did want it. So maybe he doesn't want to debate. But if he does, this would kill the debate in a way that would be quite safe for Biden to use. And this reader of the Washington Post sent in the idea that Biden say, I'll debate him if he will admit to the American people that he lost the 2020 election. Now, I can't see how Trump could possibly agree to that. I mean, it's quite true that he lost, and rarely are things in our collective life established so fully and multiply and abundantly as that Biden won that election free and clear. But Trump's following, and I've talked about this completely befuddling me, how people can believe something in the face of mountains of evidence. They at least claim to believe that the election was stolen. The great majority of this, I think, was 3/4 for several years, and I don't know exactly what the statistics are, but it's definitely a substantial majority of the Republican base, of the Trump base, believes the election was stolen. And if they were to, I've got a piece that I'm going to be posting as not posting, but publishing as an op-ed, where I talk about the implications of if Trump has been lying about that. That really shows just how completely ugly and corrupt, and I want to be able to use the word, how much of a channel for evil he is, that he has been willing to make this huge assault on American democracy in order to serve his own purposes, just like he did with the pandemic. I mean, the utter selfishness of the man is really something to behold. I mean, I observe myself fairly closely, and I can see a good deal of selfishness. My reaction to things is not that of a saint. And I'm pretty forgiving of myself. I think there's a lot of selfishness that people have, but the lines that we draw, most of us who are decent people, are that when something important that's not just for our sake is at stake, we rein in our selfishness and we pitch in to serve the greater good. For example, every other loser in the presidential election throughout American history has behaved in a way that was, I think, more or less consistent with the idea that they had some duty to uphold the democratic order. Nobody's ever done what Trump has done, is refusing to concede defeat. But this is a guy whose willingness to serve himself is a degree of narcissism. It's almost like a black hole. There's no love left, no compassion left to actually rein in anything about getting his own needs met in order to accommodate the fact that other people have needs also. Like the whole American people. We know from, excuse me, from Pence's Homeland Security person that when Trump was dealing with the pandemic, he showed no interest in protecting the American people. He was just looking at it in terms of how could he play this politically to his advantage. Now, fortunately, he made the wrong decision. He blew it. I fear that if he had dealt with the pandemic reasonably, responsibly, that he would have been reelected. I am upset with the American people. It's been very tough to see that this people of which I am a part, and whom I've always had a basic good feeling about being part of. I've never been psychopathic like a lot of politicians about the American people as if, we're some kind of ideal. But basically, I've thought of Americans as good. I grew up in the wake of World War II, and I heard stories about how people elsewhere in the world thought of us Americans. And there were a lot of, sometimes we're brash and loud and stuff like that, and think we own the world. But a lot of the feedback was really kind of sweet. Like my father told about how Americans would surprise people in what we're now calling third world countries. The American who was there as an official, if the car broke down, he'd roll up his sleeves, and he wouldn't be above dealing with the immediate stuff, and that we were a generous people and other things like that. But it shouldn't have taken his bungling of the pandemic to the point that I think 200,000 Americans died because of having him as president. We wouldn't have with a decent president who looked out for doing what could be done. But anyway, be that as it may, we got Biden, and thank God we got Biden. And when I say thank God, I don't necessarily know what I'm talking about. That's something I wish referred to something, but I have trouble getting there, looking around at everything that I know. So on the question of God, I don't have one present in my life except as something that I kind of wish for. And sometimes would be comforted to have. So the second thing I wanted to do, and I've just been illustrating, and I will be illustrating what I talked in a previous session about my strategies for achieving my mission here doing these videos. Not that I claim that I know what what would achieve it. I think I know what I'm doing, but I don't know if I'm wise in my choices. But my mission is to convey an integrative vision. That's one way I talk about it. A better human story, a way of understanding what's happened to our species that I claim, and this is why I got challenges to get a good strategy, I claim might really have a beneficial impact on the human future. I claim that it puts into an importantly different perspective what we are as creatures, and incidentally leads to our understanding that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. Into an importantly different light, what's the meaning of the history we've been unfolding on this planet, and particularly the history of human civilization that goes back a mere 10 or 12,000 years. I say mere because I see all this in an evolutionary perspective, which goes back over 3.5 billion years. It shows, incidentally, that there is that the stepping onto the path of civilization inevitably unleashes a destructive force that isn't a function of our nature, but is rather the consequence of the extraordinary new thing that emerges, unlike anything else in the history of life, when a species starts to invent its way of life. And thirdly, our nature, our story, and the challenges that we face, that it puts into a much clearer focus what it is we got to accomplish, and that we don't have a whole hell of a lot of time to accomplish it if human civilization is going to survive on this planet, rather than have our story culminate in some self-inflicted catastrophe. So that's my mission, and I've got the problem that people won't, I fear, think that the claim is credible, and then it puts me in an unfortunate light if people were to think, oh, he must be crazy, some kind of crank. If it's not credible, then what does it say about me? Just like if Trump really did lose the election, what does it say about him that he was willing to put out that big lie? I mean, certain kinds of claims put people in a certain light, and I'm determined that my claim not make me look like a fool or narcissistic, grandiose, etc. So I've in that previous discussion of my strategies here, I mentioned two. One, that I lead these things with trying to show on something more concrete and more about the things that people have given thought to, that I sound, maybe my purpose is, I feel like I probably do sound credible when I talk about Israel and Hamas and that deal, or if I talk about the problem of student debt, or about whether Biden should debate Trump. I try to say something that people will think this guy's brain seems to be working okay, so make it a little more credible that way. The other thing I mentioned, and I haven't really thought this one through very well, but it feels like it's important that that I can convey authenticity, and I feel like I do here. I'm speaking to you like I'm on sodium pentothal. This is just who and what I am, and I've had a lot of years. I was involved in encounter groups. And leading encounter groups. This is way back, more than half a century. And then I did talk radio, where I really made an effort out here in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, talking with good, decent, conservative people. I really made an effort to be myself. And part of myself is that I'm honest about what I know and what I don't know. and stuff like that. So uh, I'm feeling, this is the part I haven't thought through that well, that if people sense that they know who I am and where I'm coming from, and I don't know, but I got the feeling that that in the world today, we don't get that sense as often as we ought to when we watch other people who are performing themselves. Um, that we don't see what's really there. But anyway, I feel like this is a strategy for achieving my purpose, which is to get people who would want to know if all the stuff I'm saying, if the claims were valid, um, to spend the time it would take to check it out. I mean, that's basically the goal. Is um, I want to convey this stuff because, like, if I died tonight, there's a whole lot of what I think could help human civilization survive that I don't think would be available to any plausible future. There's some of it, like that important first piece there, that would be available. But there's a lot that I've done. I mean, that's 1970s idea. I've been working full time, real hard. I mean, by full time, I mean, I've only gotten a paycheck about 7 years out of the last 57 or something like that. The rest of the time, I've been sort of freelance developing this thing in whatever way came to me that I might develop it. And um, if for people to see what it is that I got to, they got to do something. It's not going to be an in the ear, out, one ear out the other. It's a way of, it's a comprehensive, coherent, multidimensional, interdisciplinary. I don't use that word much anymore, but it's there's a wholeness about it. It doesn't explain everything, but it really does hold a fair amount of water on some very important questions that we need to have a handle on. So I claim, so I believe. What can I say? I could hide it, because this stuff could die with me. I feel like I throw caution to the winds. I take the risk. That's the thing I came to a few years ago when I was tempted to just resign and enjoy, getting older or something like that, as enjoyable as it might be. I kind of would have preferred to be working on the good, the true, and the beautiful. Just before I got in 2004, I spent 6 months having had a spiritually transformative experience having to do with the good, the true, and the beautiful. And I had started developing something that was very exciting for me because I've spent my whole life working on the destructive forces at work in the world and how we can overcome them. I've looked at a lot of ugliness for a lot of years, and all of a sudden I was able uh, to do that. I was developing something that was very exciting to me. I was calling it mapping the sacred, and it had these various dimensions of all the forms of the good, the good, the true, and the beautiful. But then I saw in the Republican National Convention of 2004. I saw something that was, like it was again another spiritually transformative experience. I've had 4 spiritually transformative experiences in my life, and 2 of them were in 2004. One of them sent me in the direction of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and the other one involves seeing that a force that I experienced as evil, not intellectually, but just, oh, that's it. And I spent some years figuring out, well, what is that about? And that's part of the integrative vision, is that I do have a way of showing that there is such a thing as a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse. And I propose that's basically a good definition of evil. isn't it? So I had that experience in September of 2004, and I haven't been able to go back to being the spiritual elder that dwelleth in the woods and contemplates the mysteries of existence. I, I kind of would have liked to have spent my last years like in the Hindu tradition. You get to a certain age and you put aside the responsibilities. Um, you put aside the responsibilities like the homeowners, householders' responsibilities. I think that's what in the Hindu tradition. I think it's the age of 55. And here I was 20 years older than that, contemplating wanting to be able to say, okay, well, I did what I could. How about I hang my cleats and go out, put myself out to pasture? But I actually do believe that there's something here that could have a beneficial impact and that looks like it's going to be squandered, or at least big chunks of it. And I thought that was a very big deal. It changed the course of my life to see that piece. But I estimate that the total mission, if you look at all the pieces that have been integrated, that one's really crucial. But it's only about 1/6 of the whole thing. So in order to get something that's pretty elaborately developed, I mean, it's got there are core ideas which I have been presenting here in these videos, but it's much more elaborately developed than that. And so if anybody's really interested, would want to know if the claims were valid, I mean, putting aside whether it's incredible that it might be valid, but if you would want to know, then the two possibilities, more than two actually, but the main one is you go to my website, betterhumanstory.org, where I lay it all out systematically in a whole series of ways, showing the whole picture. But it's something to undertake. It's for people who value understanding things in an integrated way enough to work at it. I don't know how many people there are of that sort, but I think that that's what's necessary. I don't know. Maybe it's possible to pick it up in the more simple way, like in that video. I just rewatched that video where I talked about my strategies. I go on to sort of lay it out, and I don't know. Maybe people can just in 20 minutes of hearing an integrated vision laid out in its basic points, maybe they can get it. Or the other thing, and I think that this is probably necessary if it's going to be through the videos, in order to get what it is, it would probably be useful to follow this series that I'm doing. This is me doing the best I can to make it accessible. What it is I see that I think it would be useful if our civilization at large, or at least a substantial chunk of our civilization, saw things in this way enough so that what it makes clear informs the way we go about trying to get our act together as a species, because we have not got our act together yet as a species. We got this fascist dictator in Moscow who single-handedly has conjured up back the image that we had for 40 years in the Cold War, that we might destroy ourselves in a nuclear holocaust. He said this week, we are ready, of course, for a nuclear war. We have not got our act together. So I'm looking for people who would want to know whether if the claim were valid, they would want to know it. And they're willing to follow and learn what it is I claim I can show. So another strategy, just to sort of flesh out that one, the two strategies were show competence in some small picture thing so that it becomes more conceivable that this big picture thing that I claim to have might be not just some delusion. And then to just be transparently who I am, and I guess I think I'm a decent enough guy that I'm at least somebody that if he made a claim like this would be somebody to listen to. I guess that's the essential thing. So the other thing that I do as a strategy is I don't lay everything out systematically, because that would take, that's what I do like in the writings. And in a book like that, University of California Press, big book, 330 something pages and 23-page bibliography and an index that I invested a lot in. It's laid out in a careful way. It took me more than a dozen years. But here on the videos, since the canvas, in a sense, of a video isn't big enough to present the whole picture, so I have a choice, in a sense, between presenting something systematically, in which case it's just a piece of the thing. And it wouldn't necessarily be suggestive of what all the things are about this human story that makes sense of about our nature and our story and the challenges that we face. I think it's important to suggest that there's a lot in the picture. And so what I do in these videos, again, just the best I can, is I move around, a glimpse here at this level, a glimpse there at that level, talking about Biden and Trump, talking about democracy and fascism, talking about the force that gets unleashed when a creature steps onto the path of civilization, talking about the way evolution puts things in us, has put things in us, and how whatever we find in us, we ought to be asking about it. Is it that was life-serving? Life-serving meaning evidently the ancestors that were developing this thing were better able to get their DNA into the future than those that didn't, which is why it got selected for. And focusing on our experiential tendencies in particular, that I think that, this is, for me, it's kind of exciting because, that idea back there, that I've had that since 1970, but this is new stuff, and it's kind of enlivening for me that I'm not just playing all the old favorites. That in recent years I've come to see more about what the evolutionary perspective can show us. I have certain admiration for creative people who were able to continue to do stuff even into old age, because so often people have a kind of creativity in their youth, and then they get sort of bound by habit or something. And well, particularly mathematicians and physicists, they tend to have their breakthrough, the greatest of the creative thinkers like Einstein, have their biggest breakthroughs early on. And not that he wasn't, you know, worthy of sitting in the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton. But I don't think Einstein's last, what was it, from, let's say, 1920 to 1950 couple, that's a long time. I don't think that he ever measured back up. But I like the story of like Giuseppe Verdi's, the opera composer. And I think Jean Renoir, the painter, are two examples of people who somehow were able to continue to be creative. And one of my real creative heroes is the German author Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. I've read almost every biography of him I could find because, I don't know, there's something about the guy that I find beautiful. He lived in his early 80s and he was still, anyway. It's been exciting to me to tune in on this idea of experiential tendencies, that we're all individuals and we have our own, you know, we're born with individuality just like any litter of puppies or kittens. You know, they all got their personalities, and so do we. And then the experience that people get individually and is being shaped by cultures, that all takes our experiential tendencies and shapes us in particular, not universal ways. Not universal, but what is clear to me is that there are some experiential tendencies of us as a species. Don't have to be 100% universal, but are so widespread or so universal, variations on a theme even, that you can see something of real substance that's down there at the core of what it means to be a human being. And on my website, by the way, I've compiled some of these things that I've talked about, which are value. There's one called What's Interesting. There's one called The Sacred Space of Lovers. There's one, I don't remember what it's called, but it's got to do with it being widespread in the human genome, obviously, that for at least a substantial proportion of people to have the capacity for spiritually transformative experience. And another one is, which I might be talking about later here, is why has evolution crafted us to derive pleasure from beauty? So the good, the beautiful, and the true again come back. The experience of finding beauty meaningful is something it just calls upon to ask oneself. I mean, if it is in us as a species, we really should be employing the Darwinian perspective to figure out what that signifies. This is the kind of thinking that I think is called for, and it isn't done enough in our secular worldview that believes in evolution, but sort of leaves it at that. It's not just a technical thing, it's a clue to what's what kind of creatures we are. Yeah. we're creatures who take pleasure in beauty. Now, why do we take pleasure in beauty? Well, because that the capacity or the experiential tendency to take pleasure in beauty was selected for. That's the way things get there. I mean, it's true that if you know Stephen Jay Gould's evolutionary stuff, and he talks about spandrels, things that are there for no particularly adaptive reason. And there's some other thoughts about not how not everything is sort of life-serving in the sense that I'm talking about. But I think that this one doesn't fit into any of those kind of categories. I think it's obvious that finding things beautiful and taking pleasure in it is something that must have had an impact on what our ancestors did that led to greater success in getting their DNA into the future, meaning us, than whichever of their contemporaries were not getting that genetic structure. I mean, we're talking about a complex nature that laid down in an extraordinarily complex blueprint. I mean, you look at human physiology, and this gets worked out to a very molecular level. And if we see that everybody has some version of this, we ought to attend to, well, what does that tell us about the human story? That this got selected for. It was better for survival to be this way than not. I think you can drive huge trucks through that opening, and that's part of the dimensions of this better human story that have been added since that one, which was using the evolutionary perspective to show how if a creature takes a step onto the path of civilization, that's breaking out of a certain really intricate order that evolution creates through natural selection, and inevitably has the consequence of plunging this creature and its new kind of society into an unprecedented kind of disorder. That's what shows that the ugliness that we see in human history is not human nature writ large. It shows that the disorder generates a systemic force, a selective force that comes out of anarchy. And anarchy is an inevitable consequence of civilizing societies extricating themselves from the niche in which human society had evolved by the invention of their own way of life. And maybe I'll turn at this point to the previously advertised lead subject, which is the blessing and curse of creativity. I come from a family where creativity was very high up in the hierarchy of values. It's not like that made us at odds with the society we lived in, but compared with the average family that might or might not think creativity is a wonderful thing, in my family, it was part of the deal. When my mom died, my brother and I spoke by phone to decide what we were going to carve into her gravestone. And I can't remember. We may have assigned ourselves a certain number of words or a certain number of inches or something like that. But anyway, we worked together to come up with something. Um, and what we ended up putting on my mom's gravestone, uh, in addition to a couple of years, such and such a year to such and such a year. The only other thing on the gravestone is devoted to family and creative expression. Uh, and, that really captured a whole lot of who she was, and playwright, poet, actress. Um, and she taught creativity, and um, she was a teacher of world lit and English in my high school, and when I go back for reunions, sometimes, well, it's not so much anymore. People are not talking about the good old days as much, but having had a 60th class reunion, can you believe that number? Anyway, classmates have come up to me and indicated that my mom had a real impact on them, and um, anyway, so she was a teacher and she was into creativity, and I would say that the family culture has a lot uh, uh, of that in it. So I've it is a very meaningful category of experience for me, um, and creativity is defined as coming up with something new that's of value. And it can be in the form of a work, but it's really almost also a way of living. Uh, what I like doing in talk radio, and I kind of miss it in this medium, was I wrote a longish essay called "The Dance of Conversation," the way a really good conversation that's alive and beautiful is one where the two people work together kind of cooperatively to improvise a way forward. Improvising, which is essentially what I'm doing here, that new strategy, that additional strategy, which is to show things in different pieces with through improvisation, even though sometimes I'll lose my way, because it suggests that if all these things are really part of a coherent vision that's been worked out so that the different dimensions illuminate each other. If that were true, and maybe it becomes plausible that it might be true by not showing just one thing at a time, but doing the jazz of going from Trump to the pleasure we derive from beauty, the evolutionary perspective. Trump really can be illuminated. What we're up against in Trump, which is much bigger than Trump, can be illuminated through the evolutionary perspective. So if I show these various different things in a way which my fear is it's insufficiently coherent, that people will find that the conversation about debating Trump being in the same place as the conversation about extricating itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically, maybe it isn't even imaginable that these are all part of the same well-developed integrative vision. I don't know. And that's, creativity is always a matter of taking a leap, not knowing exactly where you're going to land, but this is sort of the best that I can do to achieve the mission of getting people to think, I got to look into this. It just might be so. Well, creativity, let's look at that. Seeing something new or doing something new, whether it's writing a poem or making a sculpture or having a back and forth banter that makes everybody laugh and enjoy being together. There's a vitality to it this newness, and it contrasts with habit. Habit is doing things the established way, whether it's tying your shoes or signaling your lane change or making small talk or seeing the world the way you always see it rather than having any breakthrough insight. No eureka. Eureka is breaking out of habit. Now, habit is worthy of great respect. Creativity is not the only value. Habit is useful because we develop them generally, I would say, because they get laid down because in some basic way that they worked. It got one through alive. And in a world where not everything gets through alive, it's no small thing to get through alive. You know, how many acorns that fall from the oak are going to become oak trees? You know, there's a selective process because a lot of things don't make it. So if some way of doing things has worked, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Maybe that's the motto for habit. And given the realities of being a living thing and vulnerable, habit is one's friend when, in terms of the, in most cases, live or die choice. Creativity comes in as a choice between a different kind of life and death, because if one is continually bound by habit, the repetition of things can be deadening. Same old, been there, done that. You know, the thing that was exciting the first time around, by the nth time around is dull. I remember in the wake of 9/11, when they were looking into how the various American intelligence agencies had blown it, somebody came up with the phrase, I wasn't necessarily there at the creation, somebody came up with the phrase about the need to connect the dots. And the first time I heard that, it related to a childhood thing, how much it's continued or not continued. But you know, the comic books that I read as a kid, you know, 7 or 8, continued into 9, and before 10. Anyway, there were these puzzles that you would connect the dots that were numbered out of what had been, you know, completely amorphous. Because of connecting the dots, you saw the shape of something. You know, Mickey Mouse or whatever it would be, you get to see it because you connect the dots. And the FBI and the CIA and we didn't have Homeland Security yet. I don't remember what all the, you know, this group knew this, and you know, the people who were taking flying lessons in Arizona and didn't seem to be interested in learning how to land. I think I remember something like that. It sounds like a comic thing, but you know what happened. But anyway, by a few years later, I had heard connect the dots so many times that all the life had gone out of it. I was no longer tickled by this conjuring up of this metaphor which I think was a really good metaphor. I mean, it's true. You look at all these different pieces and you put them together, you make the connections, you connect the dots, and you see the form of this conspiracy to inflict an attack on the United States that killed thousands of people and completely changed the trajectory of world history, actually. I actually do believe that. No way I can prove it, but I mean, that I believe that only if it would be true that without 9/11 we wouldn't have had the war in Iraq. I believe that the war in Iraq was a hugely consequential and destructive thing that the United States did um, that has taken the course of the world in a worse direction. I don't claim that I know that, but that's how I connect. I connect the events of that time into how things unfolded, including how Putin has behaved. So, to return to creativity, habit is an ally when it comes to life or death. That is, unless the circumstances change in a really significant way, which often is the case. And the thing that you've done habitually, like generals always fight the last war, that kind of thing is habit, and it's disastrous when it fails to take into account new circumstances. But a lot of things don't change, and when I go up to cook dinner tonight, I will do a lot of things that I've done a lot of times. I won't be trying to invent a whole new technique because, I'll be listening to music or I'll be thinking my thoughts. And I don't want to necessarily focus on doing for the nth time. I like habit. Um, my wife likes habit. Uh, and the two of us together have our little rituals that we do that are kind of comforting and like watching a movie together for a half an hour every night, sitting right next to each other on the sofa. That's, I like habits and to some extent rituals. But in addition to life and death, which I think is the essential reason why things become habitual. Whatever works, stick with it. There's also enlivening and deadening, which is also important, isn't it? With life and death, we play the game not to lose. But not losing is, it's not the most fulfilling life. We want to also be able to play the game to win, to have our experience be rewarding. Now, creativity isn't the only way of making one's experience rewarding, but it is one. One that's important to me. Oh, it occurs to me, I forgot to mention my dad on the creativity question. We didn't put anything about creativity on his gravestone, but we were we were at that point not making those decisions. But his field was invention and economic growth. That is, in fact, the title of his book from 1966, Harvard University Press. And he really loved the whole phenomenon of invention. That wasn't what he was trying to tease out in his work as an economist, which was what is it that drives innovation. But he got deeper into it, like going to inventors fairs and stuff like that. Because I would be interested to know like where that came from in him. But so that was Dad, and he was playful in a creative way. So I got it from both sides. And I feel that there is, for me, and for a lot of other people I know, there's something enlivening and enriching and rewarding about the experience of creativity. And, and when I look at the story of our species, I see that creativity is both a blessing and a curse. And when I think about what is it in the human world that I would want to celebrate, that I would hate for us to blow ourselves up, which we might. I think about all the creativity that we have manifest. I mean, we've created this whole domain of things that didn't exist before the emergence, for starters, of the cultural animal, and then civilization. I feel confident that there was music and dance. We know there are paintings. And there are probably myths and stories being told. And tools getting invented, not necessarily super sophisticated tools, but when they talk about this culture or that culture of some hunting gathering groups, world, and I forget some of the names, but there were techniques that somebody invented for making a tool for hunters to kill their game with, or for the game to be cut up with, or whatever. So that's sort of both creativity and then habit. Somebody comes up with this technique, or maybe it evolves over generations into a full-blown technique, and the creativity is, because it works, it also becomes the identifying the habit. This is how we do things. We can tell by this arrow that this Indian tribe made it. If it had had the feathers in a different way, we would have known it was from that tribe. So creativity joining with habit to create culture. Oh boy, what a story our species has been. Creativity is essential to it. One of the things that I claim that I can prove is, if anybody's been listening to more than one of my videos, probably has heard this multiple times, because I think it's a good way of making a claim that people, I hope, would want to check up. The ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. I see that there's a lot of beauty in the human creativity that natural animals, it took creativity to become able to control fire. That changed, I gather, it changed the course of history. It made it possible for us to have larger brains. I think that was 700,000 years ago. This is just an old man's memory. But I think that 700,000 years ago, fire became controlled by people, to some extent. I don't know what the form was. And that led to cooked food. And that somehow, and I don't remember what the steps are here, cooked food made it possible for people to get a lot more caloric intake. It provided a lot more energy. And that energy made it possible for our neocortex to grow considerably from 700,000 years ago to, the last, I don't know, they talk about Homo sapiens, Morocco, Spain, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, bones from 300,000 years ago. Do we know if their brains were as big as ours? I've heard that the hunting-gathering people of, say, 15,000 years ago had a couple hundred cubic centimeters more brain space. And I don't know what that's about. Are we not as smart as they are? I don't know. But anyway, it grew, and creativity allowed our brains to grow. The growth of the brain allowed us to be even more creative. I've talked before, there's a video you can find on my YouTube channel about culture, the cumulative nature of culture, and how that is essential as a key to the human story. So culture feeds culture, and our species was already on the path to having more culture than any of the other species. But then as we evolved more and more toward culture, our hands evolved for tool use, our vocal apparatus evolved for the use of language, and fire enabled us to grow our brains still bigger. So culture, and as our brains grew bigger, we became capable of being more creative. And one of the things that I believe I can, let's just say, my dad always put us through their paces so that we didn't make assertions that we couldn't back up. I don't see any hole in the argument in which I prove that culture was a way of enabling us to make a major, unprecedented, and fateful step. And that all we need to know about our species to explain all the brokenness that we see in the human world is that we were creatively intelligent. We had a creative intelligence. For the first time in the 3.5 billion years of history on life, that enabled us to extricate ourselves from the niche in which we evolved biologically. No creature before us had ever really broken out, but we had a breakthrough. And it was a breakthrough that unleashed a process. I would say that as soon as human beings start using their creativity to change the basic size, structure, means of subsistence of hunting-gathering bands that are basically like primate bands, once they change those fundamental things, it becomes probably inevitable that eventually that creativity will lead to a real kind of disaster. Well, civilization isn't necessarily a disaster, but it has a major disastrous aspect to it, really major. I mean, the disorder that comes when you extricate yourself from the niche in which you evolved biologically, extricate yourself from the natural order. That disorder mandates, and I'll skip the steps, that something that would be reasonable to call the spirit of the gangster will have a disproportionate say in how civilization evolves. So the step onto the path of civilization, and I would inevitably get something going. It's like a little bit of a snowball. It takes some 1,000 thousands of years for maybe, many generations for the thing to get rolling. The thing that gets rolling is a war of all against all, and that generates a selective process for those those societies whose cultural choices enable them to prevail and survive in overarching anarchic system where you have a war of all against all. That's why the ugliness is inevitable. It's not a function of the creature, of the nature of the creature. I really think that holds water. So creativity, it makes us a kind of tragic hero. We're both the creatures that have done all these marvelous things. I mean, when you look at complete works of Shakespeare, or you look at the works of Mozart, or you look at the James Webb telescope, and you think, what a piece of work is man to have created all that we've created, and to all the creativity that's gone into almost everything we can see around us, the manufacturing of all the stuff, the techniques that go into everything. I mean, how many inventions are there involved in my being able to communicate with you in this matter? I think this is probably even bigger than looking under the hood of a car, which I've always been so impressed with. All the inventions that go into that, and all the creativity that's accumulated to create this design, that they get all this going on, working so well under this limited space. Well, I think, like an iPhone. I mean, are we talking about thousands of people's creativity being brought together? We create this is something really new. And there's something really quite marvelous about a creature that's got a creativity that leads to a certain kind of, I think often a kind of joy, an enlivening. And the creative people who give us the arts, they get the joy of creating, and then the rest of us who consume that get enrich our lives because we're able to see Hamlet performed on the stage, or one movie I like very much lately, just to put a plug in for it. It was nominated for Best Picture, but it didn't win. We really liked a Korean American movie called Past Lives. It's not going to be on the top 3 list of my all-time favorite movies, but it's a lovely thing. So people who put their creativity into making that film, and people like April and me got enlivened watching that act of creativity. But at the same time, this same creativity is the means by which we were enabled to take that fateful step, inventing our own way of life, unleashing something which can be called described as a coherent force that consistently spreads a pattern of brokenness, or consistently makes the human world worse, which I say is really a useful definition of something which it can usefully and appropriately be called evil, a force of evil. I've been focusing on the truth of a way of seeing, of the validity of it. But I want to stop here and talk a little bit about the usefulness of it. If we see the big picture, I am willing to assert, we will be more likely to be able to defeat the destructive forces at work in our world. And I have been arguing for almost 2 decades, maybe 3 decades if you count my experience with the liberal world when it came to my effort to get bigger radio platforms. The failure of liberal America, which I conceive of as being, well, liberal America and the Democratic Party, to see the big picture, to put the pieces together, to connect the dots, has been pretty close to disastrous for us as a nation. It has allowed the problem of this destructive force, which is now led by Trump and in the power realm also the Trump party, but is also out there in the hearts and minds of tens of millions of Americans. This force has been allowed to get bigger because it wasn't seen for what it is and wasn't fought for what it is. It is a manifestation of a destructive force, a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse. So there are these levels of Biden versus Trump, which is really like the two knights on the field that are representing the good guys are the force of democracy and the bad guys are the force of fascism. If the Democrats had understood, for example, that what Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich were visibly doing to the American consciousness on the conservative side, if they had recognized what that was happening and what it implied for so many Americans to have their minds poisoned in that way, they would have fought a different battle. And because my life history is looking at the forces at work, I fought that battle all through the 90s. I didn't get a very big platform, but I got a chance to talk to the conservatives out here in the Shenandoah Valley and accomplish something. But by the time Karl Rove was Bush's brain in the White House, it was a storm of fascist deception, manipulation that blew away the little grass huts that my efforts had created. And then when it became clear that the W presidency was taking us into uncharted territories with respect to fascist tendencies. I mean, I wasn't the only one that was seeing it in 2005, I think was when I started writing about this. But, just look at the torture and the torture memo. Look at the way we got lied into a war. There's a lot of things. Look at the way that the war on terror was used to cultivate fear in the American people, to disable them from being able to deal rationally with the realities of the world. Anyway, it matters whether you see the big picture. If you put the pieces together, you see that there's something gaining control over a political force. It wasn't just a single individual. I've named a few who are leaders of it, but the impetus behind it was very large. I mean, it includes the Koch brothers and includes Liberty University down in the southern end of the district in which I ran for Congress on the slogan, "Truth for a Change." It helps to see the big picture. And so, here I am, a man on a mission, saying that we should understand our present political battle as one between democracy and fascism. And if you integrate going down to more and more fundamental levels, the battle between Donald Trump and Joe Biden equates by a series of steps to pretty much to something which is reasonable to call a battle between two coherent forces that have been at work in a human civilization since we stepped onto the path that our creativity took us when our ancestors started saying, well, we can plant and harvest the foods, some of the foods that we've been gathering, and we can herd into fenced areas some of the animals that we've been hunting, and then that's a breakthrough, and the snowball gets rolling. And out of that breakthrough, there comes a kind of inevitable war of all against all, because everything in life up until then had been fashioned by a process that kept on making sure that the different elements in the system operated in a way that perpetuated the system as a whole. I mean, it was always evolving. It wasn't static. But the line I always use is the lion and the zebra and the grass work together to create a perpetual motion machine, even as they devour each other. When you leave that kind of an order and you have these civilizing societies that were not shaped by natural selection, that involve something new emerging, there is nothing to order how they're going to interact. There's no lion, sheep, and zebra and grass kind of synergy. There's going to be a war of all against all, and that generates a selective process which says that certain things can survive and other things cannot. And it isn't necessarily all that well correlated with what will lead to human fulfillment. What survives in a war of all against all is, you like to use the expression, the spirit of the gangster. But let me go into it a little bit from some other angles. If you have an evolving system of civilized societies, they're not static. I mean, creativity is always going to come up with new things. Which ones are going to make it if there's this kind of war of all against all? A world, for example, where a fascist dictator in Russia can invade his neighbor because there's nothing in the order that makes that impossible. Well, we can look at the answer. You can find that, first of all, bigger societies will tend to prevail over littler societies. That much is obvious. Also, and this is something I go into in a sec. All this is in there. Well, I don't know about all of it. A society that has the capacity, the central control sufficient to be able to focus its potential competitive power in that war of all against all, will tend to prevail over societies that distribute or dissipate power around in the system. So coordination becomes more difficult. One mind should operate the whole chessboard for the white pieces or the black pieces. If you have a committee operating the black pieces and one good chess player doing the white pieces, you can imagine who's going to prevail. And a variety of technologies spread in this way too. Domestication of the horse is a technology. the mountain, the whole word, chivalry, the cheval, the horse, um, the mounted warrior has a huge advantage over the one on foot. And mounted tribes overran peoples who did not have the means to resist the mounted warriors. There were innovations in metallurgy. There's the Bronze Age, and then there's the Iron Age. And one gives way to the other because the people who are armed with iron swords will prevail over the people who are armed with brass swords, let alone only stone tools. So that you can see a whole variety of ways well before the nuclear arms race, where you could see, year by year, the military technology would evolve in the direction of more power. The arms race is something that has been going on throughout the history of civilization, really. The bow and arrow, and then the crossbow, the English crossbow, affected things, and then the cannon, the use of gunpowder. Those who prevail in the war of all against all prevail for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, every aspect of a culture can have an impact on the power it brings to the struggle for power against other societies in this war of all against all. Technology, social organization, economy, how productive is it? We won World War II with our GDP. That's what they say. Every aspect of a society becomes relevant. The psychological structure of the members of a society. Not everybody's equipped, trained, motivated, shaped, twisted into the optimal warrior, or the ability of a culture to develop the atomic bomb at Los Alamos, depicted in Oppenheimer. There are all kinds of things that can be shaped in terms of how people develop. Fierceness of warriors in one age, and a certain kind of technocratic competency, scientific competency in another, where the Germans would have a Werner von Braun to help them develop the V1 and the V2. Different things get selected for, and therefore different human capacities get selected against. The war of all against all, meaning that there is no order to prevent aggression. And the result is that only the ways of power become viable parts of the future of that civilization, creating species. I call that book The Parable of the Tribes. There isn't really a great parable, but there's a kind of a parable, and I like calling it a parable. And it goes like this. Imagine a group of tribes all living within reach of each other. If all live in peace, if all want peace, then all may live in peace. But what if all but one wants peace, and that other one is bent upon predation and expansion of its empire at the expense of its neighbors? Now, I don't say that this is how the war of all against all worked, but what I'm trying to use this parable for is to show that we can start out positing that, let's say, out of 20 societies within reach of each other, 19 of them are peace-loving. They've made cultural options that are consistent with the idea that the human world should be at peace. But there's this one little speck of a contaminant that can show that power would work as a contaminant in this system. So that if you start there with the 1 out of 20, inevitably you will end up with the whole system pervaded by something I call the ways of power. And here's how that inevitability can be demonstrated. Imagine that this aggressive one, this power-seeking one, invades its neighbor, conquers it, utilizing whatever its various cultural choices have given it to enable it to be a power-lusting, effective power-lusting society. And it annihilates the people it has conquered. And the pages of history are full of this kind of annihilation. So the conqueror takes over that land, sends in its colonial offshoots to incorporate it into its empire. So the ways of power have now spread to that first one. Let's say that the empire now looks at another neighbor and decides that it wants to conquer this one too. And it has the power to do it because the other one has not organized itself for power. But this time it decides, instead of killing all those people, how about turning them into human livestock, exploiting them? And the ancient world is full of conquered people being led in chains into slavery. And again, that their territory, the people who have been turned into slaves, their territory is absorbed into the expanding empire of the one that used to be 1 out of 20. The contamination has spread. Then they look at another neighbor, and the neighbor sees that there's a force that's mobilizing to do whatever to them and seize their lands. And they decide, this is the third option. I mean, we're talking about what options do the other people face, and they're limited. They are quite limited. You can get killed, you can get enslaved, or you can run off to some place where you're out of reach of the conqueror. And so in modern time, in the age of anthropology, you can find hunting, gathering peoples in the most inaccessible of places, like the Amazon or the Arctic. And they can survive there because civilization, for a while at least, hadn't reached the level of strength to absorb that kind of less congenial natural environment. So they leave a vacuum which the conqueror quickly fills. And once again, the ways of power, the empire is growing. And then there's really only one more option. And it's the option that in history we mostly see people at least trying to do, which is we don't want the fate of any of those people. We don't want to be killed. We don't want to have our culture transformed to serve the bullies, tyrants, and gangsters that have conquered them. We don't want to have to run away from our ancestral lands. So what we're going to do is we're going to defend ourselves. Well, how do you defend yourself? How do you defend yourself against a potential aggressor who has tapped into sources of power, whether it's grown, in this case, in this parable, it has already grown. It has human resources it can exploit, and it's got a certain lust for power in its spirit. The spirit of a gangster is very good at doing well in a struggle for power. It may have tapped into new sources of power, like they've got rifles and not just spears or something like that, or they've got military strategies like the Romans and the way that their formations and the way that they would overpower their foes. Whatever it is, whatever they've tapped into, maybe they've brought up their children to be bloodthirsty. And it's very difficult for children who have been brought up to be loving to really match the ferocity of these other guys that have been brought up in ways that wounded them, that served the needs of power. Well, you're going to defend yourself. If you're going to be successful at that, you got to do what it takes to be able to defend yourself. And that inevitably means becoming, in some ways, more like the aggressive force that you're trying to resist. So that option, I mean, these are very different from the point of view of the four different tribes I've talked about, or societies that I've talked about. It's different whether you get killed or enslaved or you run off to the jungle or whatever. But they all have in common the basic thing that is key to the issue here. The issue is that in an anarchic system, power spreads like a contaminant. What had been just one little piece of a larger societal, intersocietal system inexorably, inevitably spreads the ways of power through the whole system by any one of those four means. At the end, only the ways of power constitute the future for that creature and its civilization. There you have it. If you look at the emergence of civilization in an evolutionary perspective, right away you got to notice you're moving from order to disorder. And then if you look at the implications of the specific kind of disorder, with this anarchy, that produces a systemic force that leads to the emergence of the warlord as having a disproportionate say in how things are going to go. And we can see that in the anarchy of Lebanon in the late 70s and in Somalia in the early 90s. The warlords are what rise to the top, and that's how civilization has been. There's been a tendency for this anarchic system that's still anarchic, as we can see in Ukraine. I mean, we're trying to create an order, but not doing well enough. It's inevitable this anarchic system will elevate certain kinds of forces to have a disproportionate say in how human civilization evolves. And then you come to the extraordinary accomplishment of the fascist force in the United States, because this force has become a significant threat. I mean, it's basically, I'm saying, the same force that we see at work in that parable, and that we see in the emergence of the early civilizations, and that we see at work in what fascism did to the world in the 30s, leading to World War II, and that we can see what fascism has done to Europe in the last 2 years. There's a continuity there, and now I have ways of explaining how the force of fascism got so powerful in the United States that it's threatening seriously. I'm optimistic, but I am very worried too. It's threatening seriously to overturn American democracy. This is a story of extraordinary accomplishment by propagandists, an accomplishment that I've sought to understand much better than I've ever arrived at, because they've managed, for example, to capture the minds of tens of millions of people in some way that possible for the force of fascism to tell them things that are obviously false and have them believe it. And when I say obviously false, I mean this is happening in a democratic society with the rule of law not gone yet, and in which information is widely available. I mean, it's not like a totalitarian society where, Stalin or Hitler could impose false pictures on everybody because there was nothing else available. We're all in a position to know the truth about the basic things that are going on. There's not a whole lot hidden. I mean, whether the freedom of speech and freedom of press are going to endure in the United States for, the years to come, well, that's basically the question. I mean, if we have a president who does what he says he's going to do about using the forces of so-called justice to go after his political opponents, he may be able to silence, Putin silenced dissent. 15 years in jail if you attend a demonstration against the war, or even say something against the war. It can be done. It has been done. But they've managed to capture a whole lot of people in a situation where it's almost like building a bottle in a boat in a bottle, it seems to me. I don't know, maybe that metaphor doesn't work. It just came to me that somehow they, in the midst of a sea of available information, propagandists like Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich, and then it proliferated from there. Fox News came in. Karl Rove is another one of those sociopathic geniuses. In the midst of all that, they were able to seize hold of the minds of so many people. So the problem hasn't been exactly disorder when it comes to the rise of the fascistic force to ever greater power and the growing threat to democracy. It really has to do with the not just the disease rising, but that it's finding a way of infecting human consciousness on a massive scale to make intelligent people believe things that no intelligent person should possibly believe for a moment, and make decent people, and I live among these people, and I think of them as decent people for the most part, support things that are manifestly indecent. Something got accomplished that I've continued to struggle to understand. But meanwhile, it rose to this kind of power because the other side, which has a job of making sure that if the other side behaved in terrible and destructive ways, that they would pay a political price, allowed them to benefit instead. I mean, what the Republican Party did, for example, to Barack Obama throughout his 2 terms was completely indefensible. I mean, it's just so easy to show that across the board obstructionism is not defensible. Making it a priority for the President of the United States to fail at a time of massive crises, including the chance that the whole world economy might collapse, it is not defensible. Not participating in creating some healthcare reform when the country was losing tens of thousands of lives a year unnecessarily and wasting $2 trillion a year unnecessarily is not defensible. But they never really had to defend it. So how we got to this point involves a whole variety of ways in which the body politic got weakened or perverted or whatever. The propagandists were working for the force of fascism, and they did a marvelous job. The opposition to the fascist force was twiddling its thumbs and acting as if it was still politics as usual, when this was not the Republican Party of Dwight Eisenhower or even Ronald Reagan. It was obvious. But the pieces weren't getting put together, and the battle wasn't being joined. And then there's the press. It's another set of questions I have. I read essays on daily costs frequently. I post there rather frequently myself. And there are people who believe and make some case for the idea that the media have been wittingly irresponsible. I wrote a piece back when W was president called "The Dog That Did Not Bark," because I felt like they weren't telling what to me looked like the one of the 3 or 4 biggest stories in American history, which is what the Republican Party was becoming, and they weren't covering it. They were acting like it was normal. Now, first of all, I mean that certainly is true. They weren't noticing what I thought was really obvious, and people are now still complaining that the New York Times, even, which I think of the Times as being one of the papers that has been exposing this fascist force, but they point out a lot of ways in which they do things which are sort of like, what? Are you in cahoots with them? Is this about money? Is it because Donald Trump makes you more money? That's one accusation I heard, that the media love Trump because he keeps people's eyeballs glued to the screen or the paper or whatever. I don't know, but I do know that when you look at the American body politic, you got the force of evil taking over the right. You've got the force whose job it is, because they're in the power arena, to fight and win against that force of evil, sort of shrinking from the confrontation, either out of blindness or out of cowardice or whatever. And I have a video you can find on my library on YouTube about the source, the pattern of weakness in liberal America from the 1980s on. And we got the press that hasn't been telling the story enough. And I don't know how much that's still true. It has been a puzzle to know how to deal with Trump. I mean, he's just such an extraordinary figure. And then you've got the American people the liberals, all those people who used to tell me that I was being alarmist when I said I saw this thing rising on the right, they were like the Democratic Party. You know, when I said we got to press the battle, they said we don't want to stoop to their level. And then we got the right-wing base that claims to believe that the election was stolen. And some of these are intelligent people, and you know, no intelligent person should believe that. And they claim to believe that they think that Trump did nothing wrong, and he's being prosecuted. It's a political prosecution. It's Biden going after his political rival. You can't know anything really and believe that. I mean, he committed crimes right in front of our eyes. He made it such that the forces of the rule of law were really almost shamed into going after him by the January 6th committee and by Trump himself, who behaved in such a flagrantly violative way that to fail to go after him with prosecution would be to forfeit the fundamental American idea that no one is above the law. And that is really, it's not just an idea. It's part of the idea. Because if anybody is above the rule of law, democracy is done. What we agree on in a democracy is that there are rules that govern who gets power. And we all agree to play by those rules and to respect the wielding of power by those who have won it according to the rules that were embodied in the Constitution. That's Joe Biden in 2020. You can't have a democracy and have presidential immunity that Trump is ridiculously claiming. Yeah, I've talked a little while back about this Supreme Court. What this court did with that completely bogus presidential immunity defense appeal, they didn't rule on it. They didn't have to. They just decided we're going to delay because that helps Trump, whose strategy at every turn has been delay. In other words, this Supreme Court has sided with the criminal against the rule of law. I wrote an op-ed piece that tried to convey that to the little bit of conservative America I have access to. I don't know if I convince anybody. You know, not understanding how people have been put into this trance where they believe the unbelievable. I don't know what would bring them out of the trance. But, you know, I do what I can. So fascism has arisen in America. Putin helped it. We know that. I don't know if his help was decisive. I wondered about that. Plutocrats have funded it, a lot of them have, anyway. You know, corporate America really should step up here. And they're not going to, are they? I mean, they're not all Koch brother types. But really, shouldn't they step up? Aren't they believers in American democracy? Is it really just the almighty dollar? The whole American body politic is kind of degraded. The Republicans who've been rendered stupid and indecent. The Democrats who were supposed to be the immune system that would attack the virus, that didn't recognize the virus as it permeated the body politic more and more. The press, whose job it is to tell the American people what they need to know. And the American people who manifested certain kinds of defects. Slow during the W years to see that there's something really wrong going on here. I mean, all that stuff about war on terror, didn't anybody ask, what are the American people supposed to do with their fear? There wasn't anything to do. And if there isn't anything to do with the fear, why is the Bush administration continually feeding the fear? What's going on here? Oh, this is a pattern that we see in history, that certain kinds of rulers feed people's fears. And the neuropsychologists are able to tell us something about what fear does to people, how it disables them, how it makes rational thought more difficult or impossible. So here we are with a showdown coming. Pretty much everything that we hold sacred is at stake. First of all, in terms of what the United States is going to be potentially for a good long while, but I'm not assuming that if Trump wins, democracy can't return in any foreseeable future. But it won't necessarily, because history shows it does. Some things once lost are really tough to get back. We've got a showdown coming, and we're called upon to wage what I've called in the previous, the Great American Anti-Fascist Campaign, which means going all out. We're a side that's perennially been too weak, too little, too late, too less, too lackadaisical. Not the passionate intensity. The good lack all conviction, while the evil are filled with a passionate intensity. A line from Yeats that captures how it's been. There is no such thing as going too hard right now. I mean, the truth of the matter, of what's at stake in the battle in America now, is just completely stark. And our job, if we believe in saving American democracy, not only for the sake of America, but because the future of human civilization is really darker if we turn fascist. I won't go into that right now. We need to do everything that's possible in the next however many months is it. This is the third month, and the election's in the 11th month, and so less than 8 months from now, Americans are going to go, and the question is, how many Americans will understand what we're up against? That has to be, my optimism is based on the belief that it's a third or less, that if they understood what Trump and the Trump party represent, that at most a third would support it. I'd like to see a blowout election. But there are tens of millions of people whose thinking is not where it ideally would be in terms of awareness. They don't see it that way. I mean, if you saw it that way, you couldn't tell pollsters that you would vote for Trump. But a lot of people do. I'm not sure that they're going to vote for Trump, but they might. And it's really our job to make sure that all of those who might be moved to see better what they don't see very well right now, which is this is democracy versus fascism. This is the rule of law versus the rule by a criminal who is utterly selfish. And a party that's willing to do anything for power I think you have to get started now with some intensity, without any fear of going overboard. I like the way Lynn Cheney is stepping up again since Nikki Haley left the stage. She right away jumped onto the stage and laid out Stefanik and put out a tape, and now Mike Lee, and put out a tape basically saying that no American patriot can support Donald Trump. There are a lot of people who have the ability to do something, and I don't think we should step back from doing anything that will have the desirable impact. It'll move things in the right direction. Not to worry about becoming on too strong, just a matter of finding the right vehicles, the right ways of messaging, but going all out, starting now. Moving mental furniture takes some time. The American body politic has not been in really good shape. It needs all the help it can get to getting to the understanding that they need to have when they go into the ballot, into the voting booth and choose something that represents the future of America, whether we're going to be a democracy or fascist, whether we're going to be the leader of the free world against people like Putin, or whether we're going to be allied with Putin and letting him flush Ukraine and its democracy and those brave people down the toilet, like in that parable where the powerful, power-lusting society is able to spread the ways of power, even at the expense of better cultural options. So we got to see Trump versus Biden and all the layers that come down below it. Ultimately, what's life enhancing and what's life degrading in combat with each other over the future. Ultimately, forces that are reasonable to call good and evil, or we could just stick with democracy and fascism, which aligns pretty well with that, battling to see which is going to rule the human future. If America, the one-time leader of the free world, gets aligned with the forces of brokenness, it becomes harder to envision that we will meet the central challenge of any civilization-creating species, which is to order its civilization well enough and soon enough to survive on its planet for the long haul, rather than ending its story in some self-inflicted catastrophe driven by the forces of brokenness that inevitably get unleashed when a creature steps onto the path of civilization. We got to make this civilization whole, or it will self-destruct. Thank you.